Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. After graduating with a master's in Bioscience Engineering at the KU Leuven with a specialization in human nutrition and health, our next guest, Myrthe Stalmans, performed a postgraduate program in healthcare at HOWEST and shortly worked as a junior consultant. Thereafter, she started a PhD in the Exercise Physiology Research Group at the KU Leuven, and during her PhD, which she is currently finalizing, she investigates the role of ketone supplements in physiological adaptation to exercise and hypoxia. Super fascinating episode. I really enjoyed it. I know you guys will as well. Welcome back, everybody, to the Nutritional Revolution podcast. We have for you guys Myrthe Stalmans.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
So we're going to start diving into all things research and Myrthe's studies that she's done in hypoxia and ketone ingestion. And before we get to that, though, and learn all this fun nuggets on all that, I'm going to have you break down your two truths and a lie for us, or for me, and I'm going to guess.
Yes, all right. So my two truths and a lie are about my research, so it may be a bit boring, but let's go for it.
Perfect.
So the first one is the altitude impairs your sleep. So if you're in the mountains at altitude, you'll sleep worse than you would at sea level. The second one is that this is really bad for your performance on the next day. And then we go straight to the third one, which is that ketones can improve. I already messed up. I'm sorry.
Did you make one a lie or one a truth?
Yes, I made two a lie.
Oh, there's two lies in there. Okay.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. We can do two lies. I can guess which one is true. We
All
can
right,
do that.
sounds good
Yeah.
for me too. Yeah, but now it's a bit obvious already. But let's go. So the third one is that ketones improve sleep at altitude and can prevent this decline.
Okay.
So there we go.
Okay. So we said altitude impairs sleep. We said altitude is really bad for performance the next day, and then ketones can improve sleep at altitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing which one is the true item. Okay. I feel like from my research and studying, I'm going to go with the first one. I feel like altitude does impair sleep, but don't tell me the answer because we will reveal it at the end of the episode for the listeners. We might learn what the answer is too through the study design. So before we dive in, and we will link this for our listeners here, we're going to dive into a study that Myrthe worked on, and it's called A Single Night in Hypoxia, Either With or Without Ketone Ester Ingestion Reduces Sleep Quality Without Impacting Next Day Exercise Performance. So we'll link that below. But before we start to dive into the study details, what motivated you to do this type of study?
So it's for me, my PhD, I'm working with hypoxia. So if we're thinking about hypoxia, at one part there's the mountains, there's the tourism and so on. But we're working with athletes, and if we're combining athletes and hypoxia, we're usually looking at training camps, right? At altitude training camps. So the good thing about these training camps is altitude really can boost some training adaptations that are beneficial for performance in the long term. I'm talking about red blood cell production, for example. We call it erythropoiesis. I'm talking about angiogenesis, which is a formation of new blood vessels. There's a lot of beneficial adaptations if you're in hypoxia at altitude. But if you're at altitude, your performance will go down. So you're just exposed to hypoxia. Yeah. You won't be able to train as intensely as you can do at sea level. So that's why many athletes try to continue their training at sea level while still trying to get the passive exposure to hypoxia. So they do that by sleeping at altitude during the night. So there's a lot of studies saying different things. It's always a bit tricky in literature. And in general, in an altitude training camp, we want to have hypoxic exposure for at least 16 hours per day. And that's quite a lot. So that's why sleeping in hypoxia is an easy way to already get 8 hours in, or 8, 9, 10 hours, and then a few hours in the night, a few hours in the morning, and you're good. So in that way, you can still maintain your training intensity at sea level while still having the hypoxic exposure at altitude. There's other options as well. So in case any experts in the fields are listening, of course, there's a lot of different options, always good results, bad results, neutral results, a lot of literature. But in general, this live high, train low approach is often used by athletes. But yeah, it may be a bit obvious, but then sleeping at altitude is a big part of the exposure, right?
Right.
You won't sleep as good at altitude as you do at sea level.
Mm-hmm.
But that may be an issue because sleep is really important for training, for recovery, so for the eventual adaptations you will have and for your performance. So if you have a training camp for 3 weeks and you don't sleep as good, you might come out way worse than you were hoping for.
Right.
So that's why there's a big search for interventions that may improve sleep at altitude or at least prevent the sleep impairments at altitude.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bit of the context athlete-wise. Now, we have a lot of research on ketones. It started way before my PhD, so I got into it at a certain point. We already had two really interesting studies in this context. So in the first study, we did a 3-week overload training. So we were overreaching our participants. And one group got ketone supplements every day, another group placebo supplements. So throughout this period, we found that that due to the high training, participants, their stress hormones in their blood, in their urine, they increased in the placebo group, and this was blunted in the ketone group. And we especially saw this during the night. For example, adrenaline is one of the most famous examples. So we saw that ketones could prevent the increase in adrenaline during the night. So for us, that was a really good indication something is happening. And it's not going to be necessarily a performance enhancement.
Mm-hmm.
It's rather going to be to regulate recovery and to regulate how your body reacts to endurance training and high training load. So then we did a second study, and I'm meaning my colleagues. I'm guessing we can share the links as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we did a second study in which we focused on the sleep aspect. So we wanted to evaluate the effects of ketones on sleep in combination with training. So in that study, we had three sessions. One, just a normal day sleep. We measured sleep. Participants ingested placebo drinks. And then we had a session in which we had a late night training session. So exercise during the day can make sure that you sleep better, but if you train really late at night, it can disrupt your sleep. So we did a late night training session in which especially the rapid eye movement sleep, so it's a specific phase during the night, the duration of the rapid eye movement sleep was disrupted. It went down, it was reduced due to the training session. So then in a third session, we had the late night evening session, and we gave ketone supplements. So in that session, we found that ketones could prevent the decline in REM sleep, could prevent the drop in sleep efficiency during the night. So that was really interesting. Because, for example, if you have a long training period or let's say a Tour de France, any kind of repeated training, you can improve your recovery post-exercise with sleep. Recovery being, for now, the overlapping term for sleep and being able to recover from the exercise. So that was a really interesting study. And then if you put these two together, of course, you were wondering, could ketones also protect against hypoxia-induced sleep declines? So that's a bit where it came from, why we wanted to study this specific, these circumstances and this context, because the ketone data we saw in previous research were really interested and kind of suggested that it might actually help. So yeah, that's how
fascinating. With the kind of jumping back to the two studies you were referencing, do we know, like physiologically, what is going on in the body from the ketones and why it's able to, like you're saying, downregulate the adrenaline hormone or?
So from a really basic point of view, we do somehow, but once we dive deeper into it, we don't know at all. So we know at a basic level, ketones can be used as an energy substrate, but they are barely utilized. So they can function as a substrate, but it barely happens under normal conditions. So if you're fasting for so much time or really stressy situations, then they may be utilized by muscles, brain, heart, and so on. But usually for performance, it barely contributes. There's still a lot of research into it as well, because there are some conditions in which it may really be interesting. But in general, we don't recommend ketones as energy source.
Right.
At the other side, ketones have a lot of signaling functions. So it's a signaling molecule, and we see that it works on so many different pathways. So the complicated thing is there's different ways in which ketones work. So one aspect is quite basic. It works as an acid. So it comes into your body, it will make your blood a bit more acidic, which in turn activates a lot of processes. But at the other hand, there's a lot of responses that we can't explain yet. And we know to some extent, for example, that ketones can induce epigenetic modulations, which means that they can change the organization of your DNA. So certain genes get more subscribed or more expressed, and certain genes get less expressed. But it's really early research. We know that something is happening, but we don't really know what and why and how. So to some extent, yeah, it probably has to do something with these epigenetic changes, but it may be unconnected as well, and still a different pathway or different connection.
Yeah, very fascinating. Okay, I have a couple more questions about your prior studies before we dive into this study or your colleagues' studies. If you don't know the answer to these, no worries, and we will link that in the show notes for the listeners. Do we know if they were using ketone salts versus ketone esters, and if you want to talk about the difference of those two?
Absolutely. There indeed are a few different types of ketones that you can use. So ketone salts were, especially in the beginning, they were used. The downside is that they give a lot of gastrointestinal issues. So you might not feel too good if you take them every day. It comes together, or it's paired with a high salt intake because it's ketone salts, which is not necessarily healthy. I'm not saying that it's a big health issue, but still, it's not ideal. But especially the gastrointestinal issues are a big deal because you're, let's say, endurance athlete, you're on a bike, you're already suffering. You don't want your intestines to start being difficult as well. So there's other options as well, and the ketone esters are a big and popular option at the moment. There are two types of esters. So there's mono esters and diesters. The diesters have a bit the same issue. They can give some gastrointestinal problems, but also the amount of ketone bodies that you get in your blood is not always as high as you would want to for the dosage that you're taking. So usually, and it's the same in the study that we're going to talk about today, and it's the same in the previous studies, we work with ketone monoesters, or we just call them ketone esters. They give no or barely any gastrointestinal issues. I've never had any issues in my own research, for example. They give a really sharp peak in ketone bodies in the blood after, let's say, 30 minutes, but still you're in ketosis for 2, 3, sometimes 4 hours. So it's a nice time course as well, especially for research. So it's a popular supplement, and it works quite efficiently. There's also some kind of ketone precursors. For example, it's usually butadiene based. We're, especially my latest study, we're working with these types as well. So they give a bit of a lower peak in blood ketone bodies, and you're in ketosis a bit longer. So it's a different time course. It may be more or less convenient for certain circumstances, but that's in my opinion, these are the three most used, or let's say the two, because it's mainly the ketone esters and the precursors that are currently, as far as my knowledge and my network goes, most used in research.
So fascinating. And then do we know what dosing they were doing? Was it a gram per kilo, or was it a specific dose across the board?
There's, until today, as far as I know, again, there's not much known about the exact dose, like a dosage response, for example. It's a bit absent. So usually how we choose for the ketone dosages, we usually give 25 grams of ketones. And for example, in the 3-week study, it was 2 or 3 times a day. I'm not sure. I should check. So usually in the morning, and then immediately after their training session, let's say, and then before sleep. For the sleep study, for example, we gave ketone drink 30 minutes before sleep. So they would be in a high state of ketosis once the night started to have the optimal effect. But for example, in other studies, it's always a bit pilot testing. So we usually have a few groups of, let's say, 5, 6, 7 volunteers and we tried the protocol. We always pilot tested. It's important because sometimes you want your participants to be in ketosis for, let's say, 8 hours straight, but you don't want to overdose because then you might still get some gastrointestinal discomfort. But you still want them to be in ketosis, so there is a difference with the placebo group, of course. So it's always a bit pilot testing. So I know some people also base it on their body or on body weight of the participants. We usually don't. We did it for the last study with the other supplement, with the butanediol. Then we gave a dosage of 0.3, let's say, grams of butanediol per kilograms of body weight. But it depends a bit of your research question of what you want to investigate, how high you want your participants to be in ketosis. Maybe usually it's a range that's acceptable, but yeah.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And again, we will link those studies in the show notes for the listeners so they can check them out as well. So starting to go into your study that you dove into, and referencing the hypoxic situation and performance, kind of thinking at the real world, like you're saying, athlete training camp and these situations, maybe they're up there for 2-3 weeks at an altitude training camp. With your, again, approach to this study, is it in hopes that they would utilize or could utilize the ketones potentially for the entire time at altitude to help with sleep as a potential tool? Or do you find that it's just the earlier, like the first 3 to 5 days that they're at altitude where it's a problem?
So that would have been the next step. It's always tricky to investigate. I mean, you can investigate one aspect, but it's always tricky to extrapolate or to transfer these data to other findings. Ideally, it's gonna be every day, again and again, because the effects of ketones, not all of them, but many of them are quite acute. It also triggers a lot of long-term responses, but it's a bit early to start making big assumptions or big claims on those. There's markers for early adaptations. But I mean, still, there's a lot of research that still needs to be done to confirm this. But for the moment, for example, if we're talking to athletes, it's not really the hypoxia aspect yet, but for example, just for ketones as a recovery aid, we suggest to take it every night before sleep, for example, and let's say after training. It's not something to take, it's not something to take 2 weeks and then you've got longer lasting effects. It can be like that because it can enhance some training adaptations, for example. But sleep-wise, as far as I would think at the moment, it would be an acute effect. So you take ketones, you might sleep better. It's but then again, I'm making claims about something that, as far as I know, it's not been investigated. So yeah.
Theories out there.
Yes.
So why don't you break down your study and study design and how you went about all of that and what were these participants doing?
Yeah. So the big picture I already talked about a bit. So we went for the Live High, Train Low training camp. So our participants started with 2 training sessions at sea level, just to kind of mimic the high intensity training, the exhaustion that your body might feel. It was an endurance training, a high intensity training to make it a heavy training day, but still nothing that would be, it's not going to be a Tour de France stage or something. So it's a heavy training day. And then we wanted to go for recovery at altitude. So we mainly had 3 main research questions, and you'll see how they relate to maybe the first part with the 2 truths and a lie. So first, we more for like as a control measure, we wanted to see how hypoxia impaired sleep. Because the way an individual responds to hypoxia, well, it's a really individual response. So some people may really struggle at altitude. Some people may barely experience any discomfort. So it's always a bit tricky to extrapolate like the general findings in literature. So anyways, we wanted to see what hypoxia did to our specific participant group. So we had a session at sea level, no supplements, so just the placebo drinks. We had a session with just hypoxic sleep, placebo supplements. And then we wanted to investigate the effects of ketones on sleep in hypoxia. So we also had a session in hypoxia with the ketones. So at that point, so after the training sessions at sea level, they went to their room that was set at either sea level or altitude. They were misinformed, so they thought all the sessions were at altitude because the placebo effect is a real thing, so we wanted to keep them as blinded as possible.
Yeah.
So that's when their hypoxic or normoxic recovery started. So they had a few hours at altitude just to make sure that we reached the 16 hours in total. They spent the night in hypoxia. We put a lot of electrodes on them to measure sleep with polysomnography, it's called. It's a tricky protocol, but it's gold standard. It's quite accurate. And then on the next day, we wanted to see whether these disruptions of sleep would also impair performance. Because there's a lot known about if you're staying awake the whole night, you sleep nothing at all, your performance will be impaired. But about, let's say, a single night with more subtle disruptions, like in hypoxia, like at altitude, it's not really clear what happens. So again, a lot of research saying performance is impaired, some studies saying nothing happens at all. So we also wanted to evaluate what happens next day after you return to normoxia. Will your performance be impaired by the disrupted sleep? So that's a protocol. So yeah, all participants performed protocol 3 times. So it was a crossover design. So for one session, they slept at sea level, then once at altitude with placebo supplements, and once at altitude with ketone supplements. So yeah, that's what we did. Yeah.
And were these, I guess, how big was the sample size, and was it all men and women?
Yeah, so the sample size was, we started with 15 participants. There's always some dropout. It happens. It's part of research as well. So in the end, we have, if I'm not mistaken, 11 participants. We had 12, but one participant had a sleep efficiency that was under the recommendations of the National Sleep Foundation. So we still wanted to recruit healthy participants that had accurate sleep, that didn't have any documented sleep disruptions or sleep problems. They were not athletes, but physically active people. So they were active in cycling as well, to make sure that the cycling exercise bouts that they had to perform were not too hard for them. So we had a very active range as well. I think we set the inclusion criterion at 5 hours per week cycling or 6. So it's not going to be pro athletes, but it's still physically active participants. They were all males, sadly, because I strongly feel this is a limitation of the study, of course. It's a bit tricky because, of course, there's always the argument of the hormonal cycle. It's not easy to plan the sessions, to have all 3 sessions at the same phase. There is a lot known about how your menstrual phase can affect your sleep. So they would have been at the same time, but then again, we're working in a hypoxic facility, which is not always available. So the practical aspects were not feasible. That's not a how do you say it, a reason to not do it, but it was also because we could not do it in different phases because there's always something to it, but yeah, there's a lot of variation. Of course, it's a study that we want to do again with women, but there again, money constraints, time constraints, it's a bit tricky sometimes, but yeah, so male participants for this one. Yeah.
And what was the age range roughly?
Sorry?
The age range for the males, were they in their 20s or?
We work with young, I'm saying with some, we usually are, for this kind of studies, we work with participants ranging from 18 to 35. So it's a broad range, but still it's a bit of a similar physique or physiology to evaluate.
Yeah. That's great. And so with the study itself, what was the group that was ingesting the ketones, what amount were they ingesting? And did you say that was 30 minutes before bedtime, or were they doing that multiple times a day?
So in our study, they had, or in this study that we're talking about, they had more supplements. So they ingested a supplement after each training, just the way we would recommend to athletes as well. So in the morning, they had an endurance training. They ingested 25 grams of ketone esters. In the afternoon, they had a high intensity interval training, also a supplement right after. Then they entered hypoxia, and that was the main thing. We wanted them to be in ketosis all the time in hypoxia. So after, I think, 1.5 hours in hypoxia, they ingested a 3rd supplement. And then 30 minutes before sleep, a 4th one. So that's already quite a lot. Usually we would not go for more than 3 for athletes, also because of the financial aspect, of course. But so we wanted to make sure that they were in a state of ketosis during the entire, or as long as possible, hypoxic range. But after the last ketone supplement before sleep, on the second day they got no more supplements. So also the performance test, for example, it was without supplements. So it was all to investigate the effects of the night and what happened during the night. So in this study, we went with 4 times 25 grams.
Okay. And were you guys working with a ketone supplement company that you were using in the study?
Yeah, we usually go with the same ketone ester, although I think we switched right before I started. We don't really work with this one. It's usually just one that's most convenient for us to get delivered in time or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And okay, so sounds like they're taking it 4 times a day, 25, is it milligrams or grams of ketone ester? Grams. Okay. And this might be a silly question, but so you're saying you wanted them in ketosis. Are they eating carbohydrates throughout the day? Like is someone automatically going into ketosis even if they're eating carbohydrates, but they take a ketone supplementation?
Yes, so that's the interesting part. So usually, ketones are still most known from the ketogenic diet. It's been around for so long. The thing about the ketogenic diet is that you kind of push your body to make ketones. We call it endogenous. Your body makes it themselves. So what you do is you eat as less carbs as possible, as let's say much fats and proteins as possible, and you push your body to start making ketones mostly as an energy source. But that's a tricky process. It takes some time to get this metabolic shift. And especially it's not feasible for athletes. There's obviously going to be some exceptions, but most endurance athletes need carbs to properly perform. So that's why ketogenic diet is not ideal for endurance athletes. And that's where the good thing about these supplements is you can eat whatever you want, any diet. It doesn't have to be a ketogenic diet. So you can go with full sugars supplements as well, still take ketone supplements, and you will be in ketosis. So that's why we really like to investigate the supplements in combination with exercise, because it's not as limiting as a ketogenic diet with regard to the carbs, carbohydrate intake, for example. So it's in that way, it's a perfect match because you can just combine both.
That's great. Interesting. Yeah. And so are you sampling blood to get the ketone bodies, or what, like, how do you determining when is someone in ketosis or not?
Yeah, that's quite an easy measurement. It's just like a lactate measurement, for example, during an exercise test or whatever. It can be from the finger. We usually take it from the ear. It's a small drop of blood. It goes into one of these strips. It's a really easy measurement. Yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. That's really fascinating. Okay, so what did you end up finding from your study?
Yeah, that's a broad question. A lot of things. Actually, not at all what we expect. So first, we found that hypoxia disrupts sleep. So that was not really a novel thing. There's always some literature giving strange findings or different findings, but we found that hypoxia, especially impaired slow wave sleep. So it's a deep sleep during the night, which is a problem because it's important for recovery. So sleep efficiency, for example, was impaired during the night in hypoxia compared to normoxia. So that was the first thing. But then secondly, and that was a bit, not at all strange, but still we found that it had no effect at all on exercise performance on the next day. So there's a lot of research investigating performance after a bad night of sleep. But as I said, it's usually really hard disruptions. It's a whole night of sleep deprivation or only a few nights of sleep. And still then some studies show an impairment of sleep. Some studies show no effects of impaired sleep. But so we found that subtle disruptions of sleep as induced by a night in hypoxia these kind of disruptions do not impact performance on the next day. It was an endurance performance, so a 30 minutes time trial. So yeah, no effects of one bad night in hypoxia. But then, of course, as I explained before, we had some data that suggested that ketones may help, but still we found no effects of ketones on sleep in hypoxia. So that was a bit surprising. We found some effects though. So ketones certainly did something in the body, but that appear to be insufficient to improve sleep. Also on next day performance wasn't impaired, ketones didn't affect it. So that was, so big picture, that's what we found. So it was, especially the ketone part was against our hypothesis, which is just as interesting to find and to start looking what might be the reason for the lack of effect, for example. But
right, yeah, very fascinating. So the kind of major, correct me if I'm wrong, major difference here between your study and your colleague's study that you're referencing was they were not in a hypoxic environment, correct?
Yes, indeed. So in the previous study from my colleague, they were just at sea level, but there the disrupting factor was the late night evening exercise.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah.
We did not have the late night evening exercise, so they did some exercise training during the day, but nothing that would be believed to disrupt sleep.
Okay. And so if we're disrupting that slow wave deep sleep, you're saying that's typically is that where muscle tissue recovery and reparation is occurring, or?
In general, yes, it's a bit complicated. Everything around sleep is complicated. I'm not a total sleep expert either, so I don't want to go too deep into it. But deep sleep is important. A lot of the recovery stuff happens during sleep also because your nervous system is way more relaxed than during the other phases, for example. So it's a really important phase for recovery. Although the total amount of sleep is also important, REM sleep also has its importances, and so it's aspects which but so deep sleep is, it's tricky to say the most important stage, but it's a really important stage for recovery.
Yeah. Okay. And did you guys also sample, similar to one of the other studies you mentioned, the stress hormones, the adrenaline and those in a hypoxic environment?
Yes, we did. And we found no effects on it, neither from hypoxia, which we expected because we know that hypoxia can increase these stress hormones, but there was no effect. So maybe they were not long enough in hypoxia to have a really like a real stress response in that way. And ketones didn't affect it either. So these were some strange findings to say like that. But at the other side, the mechanism by which hypoxia disrupts sleep is totally different compared to the mechanism by which training disrupts sleep. So that's that is what was important for us as well. With training, it's a bit tricky. It's more the nervous system part. Well, with hypoxia, there's a really specific thing that happens at altitude, and it's called periodic breathing. And we think that there's a lot of studies saying that that's the cause for it. Not the cause, but it has a strong association. And there are studies saying that it has no association with impaired sleep. But in general, periodic breathing during the night is believed to be one of the main mechanisms by which hypoxia disrupts sleep. So when you're in hypoxia, a lot of physiological changes happen. And at one point during the night, your conscious drive to breathe. So it's something that we all have. We will just breathe, even if we don't need to breathe. It just happens. But if you're sleeping, sometimes that may be suppressed a bit. So you will start having cycles in which you stop breathing. And then at once, of course, your oxygen drops, and it's related to CO2 as well. And it's quite complicated. But then you get a moment in which you start hyperventilating. So you didn't breathe for it's a few seconds, right? It's nothing dangerous, but it's a few seconds, and then you start hyperventilating. But during this phase where you switch to the hyperventilation, it's usually combined with an arousal, so you wake up a bit. You won't remember. It's very short, it's very subtle, but still it takes you out of the slow wave sleep phase. So it's a thing that's typical for hypoxia. Not everybody is as sensitive to it, for example, but especially there's quite a few people that suffer from this, to say it like that. But it's totally different because it doesn't happen at altitude in normal health for most people. So maybe that's one of the reasons. We don't know exactly why ketones help in normoxia, so at sea level and not at altitude, but we suspect that it has something to do with the mechanism by which sleep is disrupted. So we did find some aspects or some effects of ketones on the periodic breathing, but the thing is that we didn't measure the breathing itself. So all we can say is some associations, some factors that are believed to be related to it. But it's definitely something to look into in the future. It's an interesting aspect. But for example, ketones are known to improve oxygen in the blood. in the muscles, in the brain as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole mechanism. I'm not sure if that's what we're going for here, but so we were thinking ketones can improve oxygenation, and by that mechanism, they can prevent the hypoxia-induced disruptions.
Interesting.
So with regard to the mean oxygenation, we found no effects. So the altitude was not high enough to really have an effect of ketones on oxygenation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we think that ketones did not really improve sleep either or prevent a decline in sleep. Because maybe the hypoxia-induced disruption was not big enough for the mechanism by which we would believe to find an effect.
I see.
Or we would have expected to find an effect.
Yeah. And then the altitude that you were simulating was 3,000 meters, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Just for our listeners, so they know what we're referencing here. That is meters, not feet for our
yes, I think it's about 9,000 feet, but I'm not sure. It's not our system. I usually don't work with it. Yeah, and that was a tricky choice to make as well, which altitude you would work, because everything in research, you're just deciding things, right? The timings, the altitude. So you need to kind of find a reason for every decision you make. So these 3,000 meters, we obviously wanted to be ecologically valid for an altitude training camp. So in general, altitude training camps are performed at an altitude of, let's say, between 1,200, 1,500 meters until 3,000 meters. There are maybe some people going out of these ranges, but in general. But 3,000 meters is already rather high, especially for the first nights at altitude. You can increase during the training camp as well. But at the other side, in literature, especially at low altitudes, there's a lot of conflicting findings. Researchers finding no effects of hypoxia on sleep or on slow wave sleep, on REM sleep, so all kinds of different results. And it's especially, let's say, above 2,500, 3,000 meters that sleep really is impaired by altitudes. So at one side, we wanted to be really relevant for the population or for the context that we were aiming for, so the live high, train low camps. At the other side, we did not want to have completed our research and then decide, okay, so 1,000 meters was not high enough to have to have anything happening at all. So that's why we went to push towards the upper limit, so to go for 3,000 meters to still be relevant for altitude training camps, but also try to push a bit to the limits of the physiological responses to, if something happens, to try to kind of, enlarge it just to try to find the mechanism, what happens. So that's why we went for 3,000 meters.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah. That's so, very fascinating. So kind of to take it in, and this can all be like theories or kind of, future thoughts, but for listeners, and athletes who train or competing in altitude, are there any practical recommendations that can be drawn from the study or the colleague studies regarding their sleep and recovery strategies?
Well, from this study itself, the only thing that we can conclude is that ketones are not going to help prevent your sleep disruptions. Maybe they do, but our research didn't show it. There's always a lot of variation. It can be that another research or another study investigates the exact same thing and finds some result, but we didn't find anything. So ketones are probably not going to be some kind of a magical substance to help you sleep better at altitude. But then with regard to the other things that you highlighted, there's a big difference between performing at altitude or having an altitude training camp. Although the recommendations for ketone use would be kind of similar, but for training at altitude, the only thing that's going to be really helpful is to acclimatize, to take some time, go to the mountains, make your body adapt as much as possible to the hypoxia. That's still going to be the biggest or the most important aspect. If you're doing an altitude training camp, let's say you have a preparatory phase and you have a few important competitions once you get back. Then there are some data that suggest that ketones do improve training adaptations during such camp. So it's not necessarily going to be by sleeping better, but it may still be in the long term by preventing, for example, the sympathetic overdrive that we talked about. So the adrenaline during the night, it doesn't happen on day one, but that's a normal thing. It can be that if you're having a long, really intense training camp, for example, it can help you regulate your nervous system, for example. But again, it's just thinking on the top of my head. It hasn't been proven at altitude, but there may be something in that aspect. But then especially we had a study. It hasn't been published yet, but it's some interesting results. We find that the ketones can stimulate EPO. So EPO is an important hormone for red blood cell production, for example. It is EPO increases with training. EPO increases with altitude. So we saw that ketones can also kind of stimulate this EPO production.
Interesting.
And it has been validated at normoxia. We're working on something in hypoxia. But same, for example, a study also from our group showed that ketones can improve the formation of the new capillaries that we talked about in the beginning as well, which is also an important training adaptation, because the more, let's say, blood vessels or capillaries you have, the more oxygen can be transported to your muscles. So also there, it's going to be an important training adaptation. So even if your sleep may not be improved, there's still a lot of interesting things happening with ketones at altitude. But then again, as far as I know, the research until today just gives indications that something may happen, but we don't have any proof. We haven't performed like a full altitude training camps, evaluated the steps after. There should be a lot of studies like this to actually confirm that something happens, right? Because there can be indications on the first day, but if it doesn't actually improve your recovery or your performance after 2 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever, then that's a different story, of course.
Fascinating. Definitely want to have you back for that other study that's not published yet with the ketone and EPO. That sounds very fascinating. I've heard, I don't know if are there other studies like out that are touching on that same topic, because I have heard that in conversation, but I haven't seen any specific studies myself.
But it's certainly possible. There's, as far as I know, 3 studies, one of which found no effects of ketones on erythropoiesis or on EPO, on the hormone. And then there's one very acute study and one long-term study. So the long-term study is also one from our group, the same overtraining study. And we found that ketones increased EPO production after the 3 weeks. At the other hand, there is a study of a researcher called Evans and his colleagues, and they did an acute study. So they had a training and exercise bout, a high-intensity training. And then they supplemented with placebos or with ketones, and they saw that ketones augmented the increase in EPO following the exercise bout. So that might mean that the training adaptations that are usually induced by exercise, such as an increase in EPO, may be enhanced by ketones. So that was a really interesting study with a lot of potential. So there has been some research about it, and the word is out. Something that may be happening there.
Very, very, very fascinating. So, with the EPO improvements that you're seeing with the longer term study, is it similar to what one would get when they go to altitude, or doing like the change in EPO, or is it, do we know?
That's a good question. Somehow it's going to be similar, because a response in EPO is a response in EPO. But it's a bit tricky to just compare like that to the altitude, but it may be very similar. It's going to be something in your body that stimulates the EPO, and the EPO is eventually going to increase your red blood cell count or mass, for example. So in that way, it's the exact same thing. But just without the hypoxia part.
Interesting.
So which is but then again, it's exactly the same response triggered by exercise as well, right? So it's it's going to be slightly different underlying mechanisms. Sometimes it's really complicated with the pathways, the molecular pathways that are working on it. But with EPO, so why this EPO increases with ketones, for example, we don't really know yet. So again, we think it's going to be something. It's going to have something to do with the epigenetics that I talked about before. So some organization changing in your genes. It's not a bad thing, by the way. It happens all the time. And there again, hypoxia does a similar thing. So altitude does a similar thing, but again, it's quite new, this field of research as well. So we cannot really say that the exact same thing is happening. We just know that the end product, let's say the EPO increase, is similar.
Wow, that is so neat. So neat. Okay, well, I want to be mindful of your time here since we're getting close. So I think you may have touched a little bit on this, but what are the next steps in your research or plans to investigate, whether it's longer like exposure to hypoxic environments or different dosing with ketones? What's on your
Yeah, for
radar?
me personally, there's
Eh,
not much on my radar. I'm
Yeah.
finishing my PhD and I don't really have a plan after. So it kind of depends. If possible, I would love to stay in hypoxic research,
Mhm.
and I mean the ketone field is really interesting. There's a lot of open doors that
Mhm.
should be explored as well. But for me personally, it's still a bit uncertain.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, the as far as I know from our group, I mean, there's a lot of publications still in the pipeline, but the new studies, yeah, it will be up to colleagues of mine.
We'll keep
Yeah.
our eyes peeled for that. Are there any other nutritional interventions or strategies that you're interested in seeing researched with regards to the effects of hypoxia and sleep performance?
I mean, there's always so many things, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm of course my expertise is in the ketone field.
Hmm.
But personally, for example, I really think the bicarbonate story may be interesting. There already has been a lot of research, but still a few things that, let's say, effects of bicarbonate during sleep, there may be something in it,
Mm,
but it appears that, I mean, I didn't have a very thorough search yet, so
yeah.
I don't want to say that. I mean, I don't want to disregard anyone's research, but I feel there's a lot of aspects that are still to be investigated. And same,
Mm-hmm.
there's always going to be some hypes, and some of them stick, and it's really interesting, and some of them disappear. But I know the beetroot was quite interesting, but as far as I know, has disappeared a bit. But then there's the tart cherry juice, which is a big new thing, and it's really interesting as well. And there's some promising results, but not that much research. So
Hmm.
there's a few really interesting ways to go. But yeah, I'm excited to read the research of the experts in the field.
Yeah, yeah. That's so fascinating. Okay, I'm gonna jump to some rapid fire questions, kind of this or that. And this is just based off of your knowledge here. And maybe and or preference when you do a study. So the first one is altitude tense or natural elevation exposure.
Um, Personally, I think altitude tents are really practical. You can
Mhm.
just go in and out as you want. You're not, let's say, stuck on a mountain. You can just
Yeah.
continue your daily routine and so on.
Hmm.
There's something to real altitude as well. There's some physiological differences and so on, but then again, it's really similar. So for
Hmm.
me, the convenience of an altitude tent is a big plus. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. Ketone esters, performance enhancer or recovery aid?
Yeah, that's quite, I mean, easy to me. For me, it's a recovery aid. The
Yeah.
performance enhancement, yeah.
Yeah.
There may be something into it, but then it's gonna be in a different context. Yeah.
Yeah. So regarding sleep quality or oxygen saturation, which one do you think is more critical for recovery?
For recovery, I would say sleep quality.
Hmm.
Because if you increase your oxygenation, we didn't touch on it that much, but if you increase your oxygenation, you will somehow partly reduce the stimulus of hypoxia. So the beneficial effects of hypoxia may be impaired. We see that it's not always the case, but
Mm,
in that aspect, I would say for training adaptations, I would say sleep qualities are maybe more important.
perfect, perfect. And then short-term altitude exposure or prolonged acclimatization in prep for a racing event?
Oh, 100% the long exposure. Yeah.
Yeah,
A few
yeah,
hours at altitude, it's not going to change much, but a few
yeah.
weeks can really have some beneficial adaptations. Mhm.
And then last one for you, polysomnography or a wearable sleep tracker. I think we know the answer to this one, preferred method for sleep assessment.
I mean, academically speaking, as PSG, so
Yeah,
polysomnography, but for an athlete, not at all, because it's a lot of cables
right.
and electrodes. It's quite annoying. You can get used to it to some extent, but if you're an athlete, you want to see you want to progress your sleep, a wearable should be accurately, I mean, could be accurate as well, and it's
Yeah.
way more convenient. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to your two truths or two lies and a truth.
Oh,
Two
yeah,
lies
yeah,
and a truth. So we had altitude impairs sleep. The altitude's really bad for performance on the next day, and that ketones can improve sleep at altitude. I said the truth was that the altitude impairs sleep,
yeah.
and I was right,
I
right?
Yes, you were right. Yeah, it was maybe a bit too obvious, but then again,
It's all good. Those are
kind of
perfect.
summarizes the study, so that's a good
Yeah.
it's a take-home message.
It's perfect. It's perfect. Okay, so where can our listeners find you, follow along on your research? Where should we direct them?
So yeah, for me, the social media aspect is mostly Twitter or X, and then LinkedIn. We're trying to, yeah, we also go to conferences and so on, but that's maybe a bit tricky for broader public. But yeah, usually we communicate on LinkedIn, let's say,
Awesome.
which, yeah.
What are you presenting at any upcoming conferences?
No, at the moment yeah, as I said, I'm finalizing. I
Right.
had a conference in February, but now I don't have any specific plan. So we'll
Yeah.
see where my career goes, and then maybe.
Yes. Amazing. Well, I'm excited for what your career has ahead of you. It sounds like you're in a very interesting field and yeah, very fascinating stuff you're doing. So very cool. Well, thank you so much again for joining us and your time today. This has been really amazing.
Thanks for having me. I absolutely loved it. Yeah.
This is great.